I've asked three different people today to share a little bit about their experience and what they're doing in the multi-siting world, and then have some Q&A. So they're going to talk for about 10 minutes about their area, and then we're going to open it up for some Q&A with those leaders. And so we got three of those. So we'll be about a 1 hour call just to talk about this idea of multi-siting. So we'll jump right in. And I'll have Rick, you're up first, buddy. And I think that's the order we had, is it not? I don't know. If not, we'll roll. And so Rick has been doing, I won't take away his thunder, I'll let him talk about it, but an amazing job with Gateway in London, and then also Gateway in Komoka, and then they started a third campus on the university. And so I want to had Rick talk about longevity, because they've been at it for a while. And so what's some things you've learned over the long haul of doing the multi-site? So Rick, why don't you take it away and share with us?
Great, thanks to be with you. I trust that you can hear me and see me clearly. When I was reflecting on the idea of that word longevity, yeah, it seems like yesterday, but it's actually been almost a decade. And so it's been a long time coming. And so I spend a little bit of time thinking about, what I would share a little bit today. And I think if you're going to start this or you're going to get into this, it's just that. It's a long haul. This is not a short-term thing. And if you're going to do this, you need to be very sure and clear on the why. Why am I doing this? Why am I getting involved in this? And I think a lot of times, especially if you've been in a church for a period of time, sometimes you go, well, this will rejuvenate me. Or this will help to spark the life of the main campus. I don't care about the satellites as much. Now, you don't say that, but it's kind of like, I'm going to use the idea of satelliting to kind of just reinvigorate the church. That's a terrible, terrible idea. You need to be very sure, first of all, of why you're doing it, because they're a lot of work and they require a deep commitment, because they will ebb and flow. They will go up and down. And when they get really, really bad, you're going to be tempted to go, then we're out. I think the other thing is that before you get into this on being on the clarity of the why, you have to be proud of what you're producing. So if you're saying to yourself, well, this satelliting idea or multi-site idea, that will help reinvigorate our church. How about you reinvigorate your church first? Get yourself invigorated so that you're proud of what it is you're producing, and you're proud to take it to other communities. I hope that makes sense. But it's like the tail wagging the dog or the dog wagging the tail. Like, if you've been around around pastoral ministry, you'll have heard this. You don't have a baby to fix your marriage. And a lot of people will go, well, we thought we'd have a baby because that would make our marriage better. You don't have multi-site to fix your church issues. I think another thought is that people may be people everywhere, and people's needs may be communal in the sense that they're the same, but every community is different. And so while your main campus may have a great DNA, you have to allow for every site to have its own uniqueness. And I can tell you that Western University is a total different animal to Komoka. Komoka is an extremely rich, almost snobby kind of area where it's like it starts at $1 million a home. And they commute in London, but London is where I work, but I don't want to bring London into my home. And so we battled a lot of people not wanting London anything to come to Komoka. That took a long time to brand ourselves as Komoka, not a London church that had come into Komoka. No, we're a Komoka church. And that took a lot of work because they didn't like the idea of London coming into Komoka. I work in London, But when I come to Komoka, it's just the Komokites sort of thing. And so you have to know what their felt needs are. You have to know what they value. Western was, again, a totally different animal in that you change hands all the time. And I mean, Robin Waller would talk far more eloquent than I would on this, but it's like every year it's a new church, new culture, new people, new DNA, because they've come from different countries, a different place in Canada. And you have your leadership team changes almost every year. And while we had commonality amongst a group of people that came from the main campus and some even from the Komoka campus to make Western work, there was still an ever-changing culture that happened all the time. And so you had to pivot fast, you had to think fast. If it wasn't working, you throw it out, you change it tomorrow. And so it was a total different approach. If you need something that is, stable, if you need something that's predictable, something that's got a strong foundation, don't go to universities because it's changing all the time. Another thought was that you have to be very, very strategic on your format. Like, are you going to do a speaker approach where the speaker is the speaker at the main campus? Or are you going to record the speaker at the main campus and do like kind of what Bruxy Cavy's doing, where you import the video? And part of that comes to some honest evaluations about the main campus. And if you're a lead pastor, I would encourage you that you need to have an honest evaluation. Are you that good? Like, are you really that good? Because there's not a minister here that doesn't think, well, what do you do best? Oh, I preach. I'm a great preacher. I'm not sure your audience would agree. Your board probably just smiles and nods. But unless you're a really, really good communicator, like, don't think that you're going to export that well. Because the campus pastor, the campus leader, whoever that person is, very quickly, they're going to get the heartbeat of the people. You're not going to, if you're not there. Like in the first few years of Komoka, I would preach at the main campus in London. I would drive to Komoka, preach in Komoka. I would drive back to London and preach again in London. Then I would drive to Western and preach at Western. That's not sustainable. And frankly, I'm not that good. And so you have to have some honest evaluations about how you're going to communicate the word of God to the people. And again, the last thought on that is that remember, you share the same DNA, but every person looks different. So like, I had two daughters, Ashley and Gabby. They may share the same DNA. They're two different girls. Totally different. And it'll be the same thing if you're going to get into multi-sites and multi-campuses. Last thing, and then I think I'm supposed to shut up. Fostering the idea that one church in many locations is very, very challenging. We battle this all the time. Komoka does not, like, even now, Komoka does not like being identified with the London main campus. They want to be themselves. They don't like being told by mom what to do. And so the idea of fostering that we are one church in many locations is something that you'll always have to work at. You're always going to have to cultivate this idea that we are one church, we are out together. So like how often does your board of directors go out to the other campuses? How often are you out at the other campuses? Do they have a board or do they have a lead team? Do they have autonomy on the finances, or are you just giving them a stipend? Do they get to decide how they're going to spend their money? Do they get to decide how they're going to reach their community, or are you going to tell them how they're going to reach their community? All these things foster independence or interdependence. And that is something that doesn't happen overnight. And after 10 years, fostering interdependence is probably our greatest challenge. Our greatest challenge. And last thing, and then it would be just because recently Blair and Angelo have become, in the last year and a half through COVID, executive pastor. And we hired Jesse McMillan, who left Connexus Church in Barrie, to come and be our new campus pastor. And it's been very interesting because Jesse's not Blair. And Lauren, his wife, is not Angela. And how they lead, how they do their campus has been very, very challenging and interesting, because if you were that close in your multi-campus, it was very easy for Blair and Angela, when they went back to the main campus, for a lot of the leaders to come back to the main campus. And so Jesse's had to try to find his way again. He's had to create his whole new thing, which is creating a whole new church. So while the Western, or the Kamoka campus is still what it is, it's not looking at all what it used to look like. So now we're figuring it out all over again. And then we had to get double vaccinated or shut down. So we decided to shut down. And then we found a Christian school that doesn't require vaccinations. So now we're back up and running, but it's just a different animal all over again. So you're constantly reinventing and retrying and reworking. And that sucks the life out of you if you don't have a lot of energy for it. Hence, I go back to the beginning. You better be really sure why you're doing this, because over the course of 10 or 15 years, it's a lot of work. It's like raising 3 churches, 4 churches. It's like raising a big family. And that's just not for everybody. That's it.
Great. Thanks. So much stuff there in that, Rick. Appreciate it. So is there any questions for Rick? So they've been at this for a while. I know a number of people have talked about that campus idea of, because of the usually being in a rented facility, their campus, and therefore the challenges that go with having vaccinations and what to do with that, and that's been a big issue for a number of our campuses for sure. Yeah. So one of the questions came in from Jesse. Would you do it again, or would you just plant separate churches, is the question, Rick?
Me, I would do it again in a heartbeat. Like it energizes me. In fact, I have 3 towns, 3 areas right now. If I had a person who is committed, who would come and say, I want to start another campus, I'm ready to start 3 or 4 more tomorrow. But that's me. You got to know, if you're the leader of this, you got to know who you are. I'm energized by a challenge. I'm energized by things that say, when somebody says it can't be done, giddy up. I want to do it. So good. I would go for it tomorrow. If I could just find some more Blairs and some more Jessies, I'm ready to go. But I wouldn't do it without someone, because it's a big commitment on their part too.
That's good. I saw another question in the chat there, and feel free to unmute yourself, ask, or do in the chat whatever you want to do. Are there expectations on your sites to multiply themselves?
Yeah. So if Blair had not have come to be my executive pastor, Blair and I were going to Strathroy or to St. Thomas. In like right away. I was well on my way, and then COVID hit. And then in the middle of COVID, we had to regroup everything. But yeah, then that was the next step, was that campus was going to start something. If Western was still going, I was going to have Western go to a university like down the 401 corridor, or to start something at Fanshawe, because we got a big thing at Fanshawe, or St. Clair in Sarnia. And I'm a big one for networking. So I would have grabbed Gib, over at Sarnia Bethel, and say, hey buddy, let's do something together. Let's try to put something at St. Clair. So yeah, I always think that a campus should be making another campus, and the main just continues to fuel it. and encourage it. And one of the greatest things that you have when you do this is your Tuesday mornings, because when you're multi-site, the people who are working at multi-site, Tuesday morning is so discouraging. But when you have a staff meeting of 18 to 20 people, you have all the energy in the world to reinvigorate the campus who it maybe only had 30 or 40 on Sunday, or everything crashed and nothing worked. But you're part of something that's bigger than just your campus, so it re-energizes you. And so that's why everybody should be doing another campus and another campus. I think every church should be looking at starting campuses across the board. The entire Western Ontario district should all be looking to starting another campus.
It's good. Good. So we're going to come back to Rick in a bit. So we're going to go through the three, and then we're going to have an open question for all of our panelists, if we could, at the end. So thanks, Rick, for sharing this part. And if you can hang on till the end, we'll have an open panelist at the end. So next up is Tony. And Tony has become the Mr. Multi-Site. And so what they're doing at Clearview is just phenomenal. So they have 3 sites at this time, plus their main site. So so four sites, I guess, if you will. And so yeah, Tony's just doing a great job. So Tony, I wanted to talk about what it means to have once you get from more than one site, what does that look like, and what do you need to put in place to scale it, if you will? And so talk to us for a little bit, Tony.
Okay, thanks, Jay, for the invite. I wanted to first of all recommend this book, and it's called Gaining by Losing. I'm going to give away 3 copies because I'm following Jason's example here. Giveaways are always good. So some of you may not be familiar with Stayner, which is where I'm located, but there are 2 resort towns within 15 minutes of me. The first 2 people who can name one of those towns, I'll give you a book, first of all. And that's Terry Granville just got one. Okay, send your address to Clayton Cullum. He's on the list there. Private message him. Second one, there you go, Wasaga Beach. Jamie just got that second one. And Rick, you get the third one, because Blue Mountain was going to be my next question, which is what's the ski resort that's within 15 minutes? So you got it before I even asked the question. Okay, so I recommend that book because it talks about kingdom stuff, which is really what this discussion is about. I don't even think it's so much about multi-site as much as it is the kingdom mentality of continuing to grow the church in whatever means that is. The way we did our multi-sites was probably more organic because it wasn't our original thought. We were just wanting to grow the church. We looked originally at moving everything to a different site. And while we were praying about it, saying, God, what do you want for us? Merv Brockwell came, and we ended up planting Wasaga Beach because he asked if he could plant out of us. So we started the church plant, which took away the necessity of the relocation. We went to 2 services again at Mom, and then we looked at relocating again to a bigger site. And instead of doing that, we ended up going into Creemore and launching a new site there. But we learned lessons from the first church plant. And so for us, it's been a learning. The first church plant that we did, we just planted it and it was on its own. And the problem with that for us was we wanted a partner in ministry. And because we didn't maintain some kind of a connection, a formal connection, it became its own thing. And eventually the leadership changed and it was like, well, who are you guys and why do we want to work with you? So what we did in the second church plant is we made sure that the connectivity stayed the same. So with our sites now, we have 4 sites, but one church in 4 locations, which means we have a board member at each site. So everybody gets representation. We have their own site pastor. I'm the lead pastor of all the sites, but we work together on a regular basis. So some of the things that I want to talk about, Rick nailed a lot of it. But some of the things that I wanted to hit was, first of all, the DNA. You got to have the DNA first. So I think Rick touched on this. You're replicating yourself. So if you're not worth replicating, don't do it. Right? If you got a lousy culture in your church, don't spread it. I mean, kill that thing and start over again, do something. But the DNA has got to be right before you replicate. And so you want to make sure your church is on board with the whole idea of growth and multiplication, because if they're not, you're going to have problems from the get-go. So one thing that I think did well was to plant that idea in people's minds. We're always going to look for the next thing. We're always going to look for the next way to grow the kingdom. We're always going to give away because it's God's stuff anyway. It's not ours. So we wanted to plant that first. The second thing I think that Rick said as well is know your why. Know why you're doing what you're doing. If you don't know why, you're going to be in trouble because you can do it for ego. That's a horrible reason. You can do it to steeplejack, which is a term I've used lately. People just wanting to steal somebody's property, and basically it's an asset grab. It's not for the kingdom. Don't do that. Good reasons are that you're called to do it. Rick said this. I feel the same way. God called us to do this. Ray Running, we have his granddaughter on our staff now, one of our kids' men's, but I talked to her about this, and she said that her grandpa had a great take on it. Ray Running, he's on calling, and he said, don't do it. Talking about getting into the ministry and doing something because of call. Don't do it unless you have to, then do it, right? And that's kind of the way it is with this. Don't do it unless you have to. If you have to, you have to. Go for it. God's with you on that. God gives you a calling and you jump on it. Another thing that we've done probably that's, I'm not sure about Rick's setting, but in our setting, it was church revitalization in the second or the third and fourth sites we've added. So churches that were struggling, that came to us and said, can you help us? And churches will do that, by the way, and they'll come into you and say, can you send us a worship team and a preacher and help us get along, or maybe some money? To be honest, that's not a good answer, because a lot of times you're just throwing good money after bad. If it's not working, sending more resources into that setting is not necessarily going to make it work. So it takes a restart. It takes a revitalization of DNA and all that kind of stuff. So we walked through those processes with the district and with those churches to help them understand why this would be a good idea, and to get to know who we are, why we're doing what we're doing. I just got a great email today from one of the people at our newer sites, one of our leaders there, who just said they were so thankful that they were allowed to heal, and that we cared more about them as a person than what they could give or what they could do for us. And now that they're knowing that, and now that they're healthy, they want to get involved, right? So I think if you can allow that thought process to permeate, give people permission to heal if they're hurt, don't just throw yourself at somebody and say, here's what's going to happen, and you're going to jump on board because we know what we're doing. I think you have to win people over with relationship so that you're on the same team. Anyway, that's the next thing I want to talk about was stick with your principles, know who you are, and know why you're doing what you're doing. Last year, I went through the exercise of creating a vision document, just kind of laying things out. These are the things that I think are really important for us, why we do what we do, that I've kind of settled on over 25 years here. And I found that as I'm looking to hire staff, I let them read that, because some of them will salute, and some of them will go, I don't have a clue what you're talking about, I'm out of here. But at least it keeps that purpose fresh and clear, and I think that's important. So why are you doing what you're doing? What is your vision? And stick with your principles. Take calculated risks. We've taken some risks here, but we didn't take stupid risks. Okay, so when we did the church plant, the first place in Creemore, we had the ability to do that, and we knew where we were going, and we had the right people to do it. Secondly, when we did the church revitalizations, we had to know, what are we risking? What's the worst case scenario? And can we live with the worst case scenario? So I think those are questions you got to ask yourself. If you can't live with the worst case scenario, maybe you need to wait or maybe not do it. Okay. We actually did the last one just during COVID. In fact, it's interesting because the third one we were launching and we were ready to launch the Sunday they shut us down for COVID. So that was crazy. And then the last one we did during COVID. So both of those were really high risk as far as church sites, starting a new site. Most people would look at us and say we're crazy for doing it. But the reality is we actually sat down, looked at it, did a risk assessment, talked about it, prayed about it. And at the end of the day, we realized we need to do this. It fits with our vision. It fits with who we are. It fits with our passion for the area. And so we went ahead and did it. So some of the questions you got to ask yourself is what has to change? What has to change in this? I think one of the things Jason wanted me to touch on was this, that there's a big difference between 2 sites and 3 sites. Okay, so there's a whole, it's almost like it multiplies the challenge. And so we had to completely restructure our staffing and the way that we ran things as we started adding the 3rd site and then the 4th site, because we had to make it so that we could support all of those sites. And we realized very quickly, you can't just duplicate mom everywhere staffing wise. You just can't afford it. So we set up we have 5 directors of ministry that service the ministries at all 4 sites. And we have a site pastor in each location. And then we have some part-timers and many volunteers at these sites. So that's how we found it best to operate. Different places will have different things. You got to find what works for you. But that's what works for us. And I think you have to ask those questions. So navigate the staffing. Don't be afraid to hire the best people. So in other words, if you're insecure, do not do this. Do not do this. Don't be afraid to hire people that are smarter than yourself and that are better than you. That's great, man. Give them a seat at the table and let them take over. Hire team players who share your vision. That's very important. Make sure that you're all on the same page and decide on your model for staffing. That's what we had to do. We had to look at that. Structure for growth. Structure for growth. So functional structures are important. If your structure is more important than growth, well, then you're in trouble. So you got to find a way to make it happen. I love the early church model in Acts, man. How did they do it? Well, what worked? And it looked different from day to day, week to week, and from setting to setting because they were trying to grow the church. So I think you have to be willing to do that. How will you do the admin? How will you do the offerings? Preaching, what, how, who? Rick asked a lot of these questions. How do you maintain vision? How do you maintain unity? How do you avoid siloing? In people going off and doing their own thing. So those are important. I asked my staff to help me with this because I told Jay when I started this, I'm probably just going to throw a bunch of problems that I've had and because that's really where we've been. We're walking through all those things. Here's the biggest thing: communicate, communicate, and communicate. I don't do this well. I'm working on it, trying to find the best ways of communicating with my staff so that they all feel like they're a part of things. We've got some great staff, but sometimes just because we're separated a little bit, you can have that lack of feeling like you're connected. So you got to communicate, find ways to do that on a regular basis. And finally, I'll say this: you only get one chance to make a good impression. So plan your launch well. Take your time, step back. We actually closed both of the sites that we were revitalizing for a time so that there was a fresh start and the community saw it as a fresh start with a new vision, with a new name, and it was a brand new thing. And I think that was one of the best things we did. So anyway, there's my 10 minutes. I think I did 11. Sorry, Jay.
Oh, that's great. Fantastic. So any questions? Excuse me. Any questions for Tony? And I see Clayton and Natalie are on here as some of the leaders, and Lawrence is here as well. And so any questions that you would have for them as a multi-site that you want to throw at them today? You can either put it in the chat or unmute yourself.
Gary?
Yep.
I just
ahead.
wondering, Tony, you talked a little bit about like siloing. I mean, like 4 sites. I mean, like, I don't know all the distance geographically, how far away you are, but like, what have you done to help avoid that silo effect?
Well, to be honest, we're still in the process because the Wasaga site launched in September, really. So we're just right now really getting up and running with that. But what we do is we meet, like Rick's guys, we meet every week. So we get everyone together. We talk through what we're doing. I'm encouraging individual meetings with our directors and with our site guys so that they can talk through where we're going, what we're doing. We talk a lot about the phrase, the throat to choke. Which is the throat to choke on this project, right? That came from Natalie's husband, by the way. He did a great job with that phrase. So like our site guys on their sites are the throat to choke, right? But they're supported by their individual directors who are working at all sites, and they're the throat to choke in their individual ministry. But we have to share those responsibilities because they're all going to cross. So at times you're having to say, listen, we're running this project together. Who's going to take the lead on it? And you just got to ask that. So it's all about relationships. And if they can't keep good relationships, you're eventually going to have to find somebody else. Because if you can't work together, then we don't have a chance when you're doing multi-site.
Good. Good. Another question that came in here, Tony. Prakash is asking this, and Prakash's site of Calvary and Cambridge and Ayr doing a great job there. He asked this question. What is the role of the director of ministries? You made mention of the director of ministries. What's that role?
Okay, so we have 5 directors. We have an outreach director. That's Natalie for us. So we've got one of our directors on there. We've got youth and young adults is another one. We've got our children's ministries. We've got our worship ministries. And we brought on an online director. So when COVID started, we pivoted and started, basically it's a 5th site online because we're going to be doing it permanently. But we wanted to throw some resources at that and invest in a person to actually make that happen well. So those are our 5.
Good. Good. Yeah. And so how has that changed from when you started? So you started with just trying to do kids at everyone and youth at everyone and that kind of thing, or what changed?
Yeah, when we did Creemore, we basically just were hiring part-time staff to do those roles, and youth was kind of dual. But as we added the 3rd site, I'm looking at it and I'm going, holy smokes, budget-wise, they're going to kill me, because it just adds up and adds up, and you just can't afford it. But what we found is you have someone with vision who has a passion for all of this. They're meeting with those 4 site directors that they have, or their site leaders. Maybe it's a volunteer, or maybe it's a part-time. We have part-timers for children's ministries at each site is what we have. We have 1 other part-time or 2 other part-time youth ministry people. Everyone else is volunteer. And as we grow, as we have the resources to do it, we'll probably add as we need them, depending on the site and what's happening. But to me, that's something that we can replicate, and we can continue to grow with that model. I'm hoping so. Time will tell. We're a little bit too soon to know for sure, but that's what I'm hoping will happen.
Cool. Very good. Another question for Tony. One more before we move on. This one came in. Do you start each site with a pastor volunteer, or do you stem the service until the growth happens? So what's the genesis for starting that site?
Okay. First of all, I think everyone is different. Every site is different. With Creemore, to be honest, it started with the guy. And we had Clayton, because Clayton was raised in Creemore and he was already on our staff. And so God just kind of thumped me and said, it's time for Creemore. And I looked at him and said, are you ready? He said, yes. And so we launched with a pastor. And what we try to do is have the mother church send as many people as are willing to go. So we want to send not just the pastor, we want to send the pastor with people. right? So even with the revitalization churches, which was Cornerstone in Nottawa first, and then Wasaga Beach Lighthouse, we brought them both into the mother. So we invited the Nottawa guys to come and join us. Sorry about that. My phone's going off, and there you go. One of my staff trying to bother me. Sorry. So what we did is we brought them into our site for a while because we wanted them to know who we were. And they came in, they enjoyed the worship, they enjoyed being a part of it, and then we launched with a pastor. So we had that pastor brought in, they preached there, and then they took their guys back and some guys from the mom with them. All right. With Lawrence, it was a little bit different. We had Lawrence, who was already serving as the interim pastor from the district. But because of COVID, we were having outdoor services in Wasaga or in Stayner. So we brought everybody in together from Wasaga Beach, which was great. And at the end of the summer, we just said, okay, now we're relaunching and Pastor Lawrence is taking them. Who wants to go? And we had a whole slew of people go over there and relaunch. We're still waiting to see what we have once we get out of this. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think both of those sites are going to take off and all three of them are going to grow. So
That's good. Good. Well,
Lawrence, great question.
Oh,
Lawrence wants to know who's my favorite site pastor. Yeah, I'm leaving that one alone.
it's definitely not Lawrence now. It might have been before, but now. So Lawrence is just trying to make all the news headlines all the time. So that's Lawrence. So he's the media grab. So yeah. So we'll move on from Tony now to Dave, and Terry's on as well. And so Dave started a site, and then we've seen this, and Rick touched on it a little bit, like what happens when you transfer leadership in the site. And so that's where I've seen sites kind of go off the rails at times when there's a leadership change. So I just wanted Dave to talk a little bit about that journey with their site. So go ahead, Dave and Terry. Yeah.
Thanks, Jay. Rick and Tony, just awesome stuff. Probably be some overlap here. Yeah, we launched over 4 years ago, and I mean, it just went ahead. It went really well. Curtis and Amber Moore just did an incredible job. We had Sundays, over 100 people out, and but it's like what the ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus says: the only constant in life is change. And Curtis let us know that another church was pursuing him to be the lead pastor. And so I prayed that blessing over him. The Lord bless you and keep you, and may he pour his wrath upon you. Yeah, we're still friends and all that. But, when you got things going well and you get surprised like that, and then COVID, it was a double whammy, COVID and then a transition from the campus pastor. So, but God is able. And I guess I just start off by echoing what Rick said about the ebbs and flows, to be prepared in your mind for surprises. Have a contingency plan. If your campus pastor blew a tire tomorrow, or they got called away to another church or another planet, what would you do? You're the one holding the bag. So you want to be thinking about that, not consumed by it, but you want to be ready for surprises. I think another one is finances. Have you raised money for contingency? Because there are ebbs and flows and surprises. So I just think thinking that through and being ready. 3 little things I had for you about hiring somebody new. And I just echo again what Tony said: communicate. I would slow down the hiring process of a new campus pastor, and I would just talk through so many things. When I got a 5-part process. I would take extra time in hiring a campus pastor. So you want to make sure that they share the same vision, values, and understanding about authority. This is just so important. What is the purpose of our church specifically? You know, there's 30 people on this call, 30 different churches. I mean, we all have the same mission, but we all look different. And so you want to really clarify the special assignment and purpose that your church has. Our main goal, our strategy, our specific assignment is. And depending on who you're interviewing, that's really going to be fluid. Well, the second one is culture. What do you want your Sunday gatherings to look like? Who's writing the message? Who's preaching the message? How will the campus site look similar or different from the main church? What are the non-negotiables? These are things that you have to go deep on with the person that you're interviewing to make sure that there is some kind of similarity, some kind of family, some kind of sense that they can buy in. And then lastly, I think authority is one thing that really needs to be talked through. When does the campus pastor have authority, and when do they have influence? When do they have authority to make decisions, and when do they not have authority, but they have a voice and they have influence? Clearly identify the lines between authority and influence. Talk about who will hire the staff, who the staff will be accountable to. Talk about spending decisions. Who's going to raise the budget? How's it going to be spent? Talk about outreach. What's that going to look like at the campus? So I just think running through these questions and asking them in advance can save you just so many headaches. I'll underline what Tony said again. Communicate, 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 communicate. How many times in staff relationships have we heard this? You never told me that. Job description, weekly meetings, communicate, over communicate. You already told me that. I don't care. I want to tell you again. It's important. This is a non-negotiable. So we're going to just close off. Terry is going to share with you what it's like to work for me. No, Terry's going to share about coming on team in a multi-site as a campus pastor.
Thanks, Pastor Dave. So yeah, Pastor Dave gave me a question to answer. How can someone be prepared to act as a campus pastor or to come on as a campus pastor in an existing culture? And the first word that came to my mind immediately was that this is a call to serve. So we all know Matthew 20, 27, 28, whoever wants to be first among you must be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. And that's obviously a well-known verse for all of us and as believers, and maybe, you know, take that up a notch as leaders of churches. You know, that's one that we take to heart. We're called to take our cues from Christ, and he laid his life down. And so we are called to serve in the same manner, in the same fashion. But when I was kind of starting as a campus pastor, that was a verse that came to my mind, and it hit me differently. We have a unique dynamic as site or campus pastors that we have to navigate, where on the one hand, we're called to lead a unique body of believers. And there's always, you know, and I think Rick, you mentioned this, talking about, you know, every community, even if it's in the same city, it has its own its own unique kind of flavor. And there's so many nuances in how we do things that come with that. So we're called to lead that, but simultaneously we're called to serve and support the leadership, the lead pastor, and the overarching vision of the church that we're called to be a part of. And so I think that one of the keys that we have into doing that well is when we come to the role, we come to it with a humility and a commitment to first be a servant. serve first, lead second. And so to me, I think it's important that we understand that there's a really big difference between being a lead pastor and a campus pastor. They're different roles. And if I'm coming to a campus pastor role, it's really important that I have clarity about this calling, because if I get it twisted, which happens sometimes, then it creates tension. And so it's important that I understand that I have a voice. It doesn't mean that I don't have a voice, and it doesn't mean that I don't have a seat at the table. It just means that I have to, as a campus pastor, understand that I don't have the head seat at the table. And that's okay. But some people, I think sometimes that can sit funny with people, and it can kind of rub the wrong way, and may even offend. And I would just say, if somebody's coming on, and if maybe you're thinking of being a campus pastor, I would say, if that sits funny with you, take time. Don't jump into a role like this, because it is unique. Take time and pray that through, and get counsel, and get and talk to somebody about maybe why, because some people are called to different things, and a campus pastor is there is a unique dynamic that needs to be really understood. And if you're in that place and you're finding that there's tension, I would say I think communication, and we've heard that now multiple times, is so key. Like having that conversation, having mentorship, having conversations, hard conversations sometimes with your leadership, with your lead pastor, to navigate that and figure out maybe what it is that you're struggling with, or and pray. Maybe there's some things that need to be laid down, or maybe there's a change in direction that needs to happen, and that's okay. But we need to work through that. And this is why, because our job as pastors is to care for the health of God's church. And we can't do that if we lack clarity on our role, and if there's tension within our leadership teams. So a house divided, we know this, a house divided can't stand. So my final thought would just be that we should be just committed to being leaders who are committed to unity through servant-heartedness. And that's my thought.
It's great, Terry. You know, we've found a real synergy both with Curtis and now with Terry. We start out with a thought at the beginning of the week for the message, and then I write a message and send it off to Terry on Wednesday and Thursday, and then she can make it her own in her own voice. And it's quite powerful because we build it together, but the points are the same. And it's really been kind of neat how we've done that in concert. Anyhow, back to you, Jay.
Great. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Terry. Any questions for Dave and Terry at this moment? How do you deal with preaching in multi-sites? So Dave, you kind of mentioned it there a little bit. Maybe let's throw that out to all three leaders if we could. How do you guys deal with the preaching? This is probably the number one question that gets asked when people are considering multi-sites. So tell us a little bit about what you guys do as a preaching dynamic for your sites. Tony, then Rick, go ahead.
Okay. We do similar to Dave. We're planning further ahead now. I got a bunch of guys that love to plan like months in advance, which is really different for me because I'm more of a fly by the seat of your pants kind of guy, but they love to plan in advance. So we've got our series planned out now through the end of the year. But what we do now is we break that down. We study together or we study separately the same section, and then we'll get together and we'll talk about it. So when we do preach, we are preaching the same theme in our own words, like kind of like what you talked about, Dave. I think that's important. Just so everybody's hearing the same thing. It's the same heart, same vision, but it's in our words and it's uniquely designed for that particular site. That's how we do it. So.
Good. Rick?
The August before the following year, we sit down together as a team. We have a team we call West Weekend Services Team. It includes all the communicators, everyone who is involved in creating our services. We pray about it in August, and we will kind of get a theme and an idea for the year that is to come. Then in October and November, we sit down as a team and we lay out the entire year. Every series, every message, every communion, every water baptism, every service is completely planned out and in the can by January 1.
Wow.
Then what happens is I will prepare a one-page brief at the beginning of each series, and 3 weeks before that series, we have a separate meeting where we sit down and I unpack the vision of what I really think God wants us to have for that series. Then we work together on all of the ideas that will be the components that will make the experience for the weekend the most impactful. And then by the Wednesday of each one of the messages, by Wednesday night, like so today, as soon as we're done here, I started at 7 this morning, and I will go back and I won't go to bed tonight until I have pretty much about a 3,000 word draft that by tomorrow morning will go to the other preachers. Then they can do whatever they want with it. I don't care. As long as you stick to the basics of it, add your own stories, change it. If you think it's dumb, then do something different. But you got to stick to the framework of that 3,000 word draft. And you have to have that ready to go by Thursday night, Friday, because then all of your graphics, displays, your videos, and everything else have to be fitted in so that every slide presentation, every not PowerPoint, but Pro Presenter, that all the Pro Presenters are ready to go for every campus. So it's actually a bit of a machine, and it takes a good chunk of our time.
Good. Any other questions that you want to throw to all the panelists or one of the panelists? James?
Yeah, yes. Thanks, Jay, for organizing such a great meeting. Thanks so much. This is to Rick and Tony together. Rick, you were mentioning about if you cannot do it, better don't do it, or don't think about having multi-campus or having same church in different places, kind of. That's a good point. And Tony was mentioning about know the purpose, why you are doing, whether it is necessary to do that. Giving a scenario here. Okay, the vision is to reach some of the community churches or people living in different areas, but they are looking for their own language, their own way of service, and where they don't have that community churches. So identifying someone there, or maybe sending out someone, making a leader from our campus, sending them there or being there, helping them to support them to some time until they get established, and then leaving them on their own. I would love to hear from you both, your inputs on that. Thank you.
You want to go, Rick? No.
Yeah, sure. I'm actually quite open to that. Are you thinking of different cultures or different communities? Because a community would be different than a culture. So
communities, sorry. Yeah.
Communities. Okay.
Yeah.
So if a person, and again, you don't start a ministry without a minister. So part of what Slater was saying about the way in which you have that authority and responsibility, you have to know that person. Is that person itching to do their own thing, or are they itching to be a part of a team?
Oh.
If they're a quarterback and they really are at the heart of a quarterback, then I'm not opposed to that, because I got big shoulders too, so I can handle the quarterback. But then I would start from the very beginning. I'm going to help you for 18 months and then sink or swim or die. You're on your own. As opposed to someone who says, no, I want to be a part of a team and I want the support over a long haul. Then that'll be a different thing. Then it's more like, again, if you're following the NFL, then it's more like the coach is calling the plays, but the quarterback still has to execute them. So that's kind of how I would balance that out. But again, to Slater's point, it's absolutely key to know the personality of the campus pastor, because if they get it in their heads that they want to do their own thing, you're going to have a mess on your hands. And so as they slowly begin to develop a DNA, they slowly begin to develop a hunger. If that starts to happen, and that's not bad at all. But then there has to be enough communication, enough relationship, and enough there has to be enough self-esteem and self-worth to go, you know what? I think you're ready to go on your own. So for instance, I used to always say to Blair, the day you want to leave, just don't backdoor me. You let me know and we'll make this happen.
Huh.
And he'd go, boss, I'm loyal to you. I'm in for the long haul. And he's been with me for 20 years. But he's always known, anytime you want to go, you can go. You want to take Kamoka on your own? Let's work it together because I want the kingdom to win, not me to win. That's how it's got to work.
That's good. Great.
That's good.
Thank you. Thank you. Great.
One more question maybe, and then we'll just have a little bit of breakout time. So Jesse asks, how far away should the site be from the mothership? So this is a good question because we probably have some divergent answers here because these are relatively close. I got Jerry on here who has sites all across Canada as well, right? And so how close to the mothership, and what do you recommend? So
It all depends. I think every situation is different. And like with us, like we're all within 10 minutes of each other, 15 minutes of each other at the max. So that's really close, but it works for us because they're separate communities and they recognize each other as separate communities. So it works. I think you have to look at the individual setting. And like sometimes, yeah, hey, listen, there's a center. Shelburne is a great example, right? Shelburne is sitting there half an hour from us and half an hour from Orangeville, needs a church. Is it right for a site or is it right for a plant? Right? Those are questions you got to ask. And it all depends. There is no right answer to that question, I don't think. I've known people who've done the sites in different countries and made it work. Right? It all depends.
Yeah, I would agree. I would think it's not that the all depends is conditional on the strategy.
Yeah.
So what's the strategy and how are you going to implement? You know, you're not, if you're, so right now, and I should have a chat with you, Jason, at another time, but right now I'm dialoguing with another church in our assemblies that's almost 2 hours away that is wanting to talk about becoming a site campus with us. So, you know, we're now having conversations about, okay, well, what would a campus look like that's 2 hours from London? And what would that look like? Is it a partnership? Is it a merger? Are we helping temporarily or is it assimilation? You're going to sell your assets. They all belong to Gateway London, you know? So there's all of these possibilities, but it comes down to what is the strategy and what is the end game? What's the end run here? I would love to have sites in St. Thomas, which is about 35 minutes away. Well, that's fine, except I'm not sending a band who are going to travel from London to St. Thomas every single Sunday. That's not going to work. So how you set up your church, how you set up music and home groups and all those things, that strategy is very dependent on the geography of where you're headed. You get to be so far away, and then they have to be more independent in some areas and more interdependent in other areas. Sometimes it's just a matter of, we want to own the DNA, but we're going to do something totally different. In that respect, you know what? It would be Tony could start something in London and I could start something in Blue Mountain.
Yeah.
And it would work fine, especially if we're not territorial.
Yeah.
Then it's just the kingdom win.
Mhm.
And that's really what it should be. Who cares what name it is?
So good. And I think this is kind of an interesting, just even as you say that, like we have some of these churches. There's a Filipino church that's planted a Nepali congregation as one of its sites. Like that's a very unique thing, right? And so you can do it as long as the DNA is still the same there, right? And knowing and communicate. Yeah.
And there's another example, Jason. So we first 1 year before COVID, or a year and a half, we started a Nepali congregation. You want to talk about geography? We started a Nepali congregation in the city of London because there's such a huge mass of immigrants that left Quebec and came to London, Ontario, that are Nepali with Papusa.
Yeah.
But we couldn't make it work in the city. because the geography was too far. Now you're going, what do you mean? London is located in the northwest end. The Nepali people live in the east end. They don't have cars. We gave them money, resources, everything was free. I would have given them an office. We would have funded them, but it still couldn't work because I couldn't get the people to travel across the city because the buses in London don't function in the mornings or in the afternoons in the right time for when they wanted to have church. So geography doesn't matter whether it's whether it's 3 hours away or whether it's a 20-minute drive. It may or may not work depending on what the circumstances are.
That's good. Well, everyone, this is a good start to our conversation. So thanks, Tony. Thanks, Rick. Thanks, Dave, Terry, as you chimed in. So here's what I'd like to, Dave is on here. And so Dave's taking over the New Churches Network and multiplication. So he'll kind of get rolling. And Jamie, this has been his heart to get going. And we see this more and more. So I look at this call, like all these very unique multi-site things we got going on here. So Brian's got one just up the road in a school that they own the school of. You've got Michael Bronson, who's now starting in Dundas and then in Bimbrook. You've got Jerry with like a zillion all over the planet and has been doing it for years and years and years and years. And so there's just so many different approaches that are represented on this call in different styles. And I think it's amazing. And so we've got northern churches, we've got rural churches, we've got cultural-based churches, we've got a little bit of everything on here. And I think there's stuff to learn from each other on this call. So one of these things, I'd like to keep this conversation rolling in the future, and also to make a network to see, as you get guys and girls look around and say, who else is doing this around our district? Because sometimes I think you feel like you're a little all alone in this conversation of multi-site and what's going on here. And so just love kind of what's happening here. And so I'm not telling Dave what to do because he's going to run with what he wants to do as he takes leadership. So we're praying for you, Dave, as you wrap up at Parkview and jump into this role. We just speak blessing over you when it comes to that. But I think there's a good opportunity for this conversation to keep rolling. And so yeah, and the Kevin and Kevin's on here. Just I look and I just see so many different styles of the multi-site, which is sweet. So good. So just before we go, if we'll maybe pray, but then if we break into some just some smaller groups, just for less than 5 minutes, if you can, just to connect with one another, and then you got a couple frame of reference, and maybe you can just cheer on the person that you're in a breakout session with for 5 minutes if you could. Okay, so let's just pray. God, we just say thank you for this time, Lord. I bless, Lord, what you're doing through all these churches, Lord. I'm just so excited what you're doing in our district, Lord, through multi-siting and the amazing stuff going on. And so we bless that today. And Lord, bless each one of these different, unique expressions of your kingdom. In your name we pray. Amen.